Zamalane ndiambuye lelo zamalane Mbuye ngiza kwa inu kuti ndipulumuke Ambuye titireni chifundo Chombo cha Noa Zamalane ndiambuye lelo zamalane Ambuye titireni Mbuye ngiza kwa inu kuti ndipulumuke Mbuye ngiza kwa inu kuti ndipulumuke
Hello, I'm Sasha Nicole, and this is Robert Riggs, the COO of Lift Up the Vulnerable, and Eugenio Kirima, the Chief Program Officer of Lift Up the Vulnerable. The mission of Lift Up the Vulnerable is to prevent trafficking and oppression of vulnerable children and women, and empower them to be change makers in their communities. So Rob and Eugenio, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you too.
Yeah. Before we dig into this, could you both share with us a bit about your backgrounds and what brought you to this work?
Well, for me, I was working for several years in the country of Jordan. And then after that, I returned to the United States and I was working as a professor at universities for a number of years. And about 2 years ago, I decided I'd like to move back into direct practitioner work in the area of international development, and I found Lift Up the Vulnerable, and the rest is history. Here I am.
Yeah, thank you so much. For the better part of my youthful life, I worked for a corporate. For 17 years, I was working for Firestone East Africa, a company which used to manufacture motor vehicle tires. And when I was working for Firestone, I was in charge of warehousing and distribution, and that gave me a chance to move into several East African countries. And of course, at that time, I didn't know anything about human trafficking. I was so much interested in, in production and making profits for the company. And so my terminology every time is, how much have you made for the company? In the year 2007, I felt a little urge to just leave the corporate. I didn't have any particular reasons, which I can probably specify and mention, but I found a lot of unsatisfaction in my heart that I was not getting the happiness, irrespective of working for 17 years, going up the ladder from a junior officer to a senior management team, and it got to some point where one day I woke up and I just said, I don't want to work anymore. My heart was becoming heavy. And I quit. And after 2 years, I met Kimberly Smith, former president of Make With Partners, who are involved in anti-trafficking network. And so after connecting with Kimberly, as Rob said, the rest is history. I have had a chance through the human trafficking, of course, to work in Congo and Sudan and South Sudan. And so since the year 2009, I've been in the anti-trafficking network. Thank you.
Excellent. And what geographical area does Lift Up the Vulnerable work in, and why is that significant?
Well, it will be not fair to mention where I'm working without probably first giving you a brief history of Sudan and South Sudan. Those two ones are so much related. And South Sudan gained independence from Sudan in the year 2011. That was after, of course, they signed a peace agreement in the year 2005. There was a lot of austerities prior to that. But now coming back to your specific question on where we are working and the significances, one of our oldest locations is called New Life Ministry. It's along the border of Darfur in South Sudan. And we started New Life Ministry during the height of the Darfur violence and genocide, actually. And so at that time, the Sudan government was perpetuating a lot of killings to the predominantly Black South Sudanese population. And that's the time the Sudan government, under the leadership of former President Omar al-Bashir, released the meritorious called Janjaweed. The Janjaweed basically in Arabic means devils on horses. And they were crossing over to South Sudan, killing men, raping women, abducting children to be slaves. And that is the time when we started New Life Ministry to counter the effect of the Janjaweed effects. The next one to open in 2009 was all for South Sudan. It's right at the border of Uganda. It's about 70 kilometers from the border of Uganda. And we started it in 2009 also, when there was a lot of fights and a lot of attacks from Lawrence Resistance Army. Lawrence Resistance Army is a ragtag militia which was based in Uganda under the leadership of Joseph Kony. As a matter of fact, I think it's one of the armies which is known to have caused a lot of havoc. Their work was to rent the villages, put them on fire, kill the men also, abduct the children. The boys would be turned into some soldiers, and the girls would be handed over to the soldiers to be wives. And of course, they would kill the elderly men and the elderly women after raping them. And that is the time we started all for South Sudan to take care of the children who are left orphans as a result of the attacks, because there were so many. And the third one was OFC. It's called Our Father's Craft. It's in the Nuba Mountains. And also, it was started during a very terrible time, because after the secession of South Sudan from Sudan, the people in the Nuba Mountains are Blacks and were associated, of course, were fighting together with the South Sudan army. But unfortunately, after South Sudan got independence, the Nuba people were left in Sudan against their wish. And therefore, in the year 2011, they took arms against the government of Sudan. And so during the year 2012, again, the president, Omar al-Bashir, kicked out all the non-government organizations, including UN, from the Nuba Mountains. And he started serious bombardment against the people in the Nuba Mountains. And so women and children were running to the mountains to sleep under the crafts so that they could secure themselves from the bombings which were being dropped on them. And when we were going over to start Our Father's Craft in the Nuba Mountains, every other NGO was getting out. We had a choice also of not to start because of the violence, because things were too bad, but we couldn't withstand to see the suffering. And that is the time now we started Our Father's Craft.
Okay. And the efforts and protections that are provided by Lift Up the Vulnerable are indigenously directed. Could you say more about how and why that's important?
Yes. Well, this is one of the aspects of our organization that I think is very, very important, because as Eugenio just mentioned, many organizations that work in development are captive to the whims of governments that may not always want them there. And so international organizations that try to work in countries with governments that may be sometimes hostile to them can find themselves kicked out at a moment's notice, a target for attacks, and a lot of other disruptions to the operations. But in our case, the strength of the organization is that we do not partner with leaders on the ground that aren't from the local area and have strong relationships with local government and with the community. So community relations are a key aspect of the success of our organization. And this means that rather than being viewed as a foreigner and therefore as a potential target for various types of exploitation from governments or attacks by locals who view the organization as a, kind of a foreign entity, our partner, the organization, the centers that we partner with and the leadership are locally registered with the government and sanctioned, and in fact are so well supported that in many cases they are able to serve as legal custodians temporarily for some of the children that were, orphaned or are in a very difficult situation. So it just allows the ability to continue the work going no matter what the geopolitical situation is or the local conflicts that might arise. And so that's why it's just so critical for what we do.
Yeah, and it definitely adds a sense of sustainability and durability too, because if for some reason you're not able to participate or help them, you've got locals right there that are knowledgeable and capable.
And they to say one more thing, they are the ones that are directing the agenda. Yeah. And that's the other, I guess, really critical piece is that we're not directing from above the agenda. We are in constant conversation and discussion and strategy sessions to determine what works, right? The primary question is always, will it work, and will it work well? And the only way to know that is to be someone who's very well acquainted with the location and the culture and the society. And so I don't think I need to say any more than that.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. And also, as I understand it, your model has 3 pillars: protection, education, and economic empowerment. Tell us a bit about how that model is executed and how each component is crucial for a holistic approach towards your mission.
Right. And this is the second kind of part to follow up on Eugenio's explanation of the conflict zones that we work in and the importance of having a holistic approach to empowerment. Because the first pillar of our approach is protection. And I don't think I need to go into too much detail with this because I think it should be pretty self-explanatory from what Eugenio is describing, that when there are, sometimes up to millions of internally displaced people, when there are marauding gangs of armed militants that are capturing people, when there are significant numbers of single or double orphans, and a high percentage of the population that is a very high percentage, up to, in some estimates, 7 million people out of 12 to 13 million total population who are totally food insecure and on the edge of starvation. The first priority has to be protection, and that includes safe housing, it includes food security, it includes medical care. And so that is our first pillar. Mm-hmm. And that's what we provide. The second pillar of education is offered through K through 12 education. And then the economic empowerment component is in several parts. One part would be preparing the students as they are being educated with additional skills that will help them to develop, jobs and small businesses. There's an aspect of the potential for university education for some of our students, and Eugenio will talk more about this shortly. And there's also the opportunity for kind of vocational training in nursing, midwifery, and a number of other mechanic and many other skills that are a necessity in a country where the infrastructure has been devastated by warfare for nearly 5 decades. And then the other aspect of economic empowerment is community outreach through agriculture and agribusiness. And we have a growing emphasis on this area because South Sudan and the Nuba Mountains, where we work in Sudan, are both areas that have significant rainfall and much more than many other places in East Africa or across the continent. And with the right support, it's not outrageous to say that South Sudan could be the breadbasket of East Africa. Mm-hmm. And so there's fertile ground, there's great opportunity there, and we've already begun to work in that area. And I know Eugenio is going to talk more about that, but that's the idea of local income generation is another aspect of economic empowerment that we're really turning towards, pivoting towards, and focusing on.
It sounds fairly, it kind of, what I heard in that is like, it's a bridge. So you start with people that are really vulnerable and, very much need to be poured into and to be protected. And then you kind of guide them to autonomy. It's kind of what I heard in everything you just described, mm-hmm. Which leads me to my next question about the fact that Lift Up the Vulnerable was originally a relief organization. And now it's pivoted towards development. And I think I'm really excited about this question because I think that's really what the platform Emanate is really about, is promoting development and how do we really help people to become autonomous. And I think sometimes there can be this disconnect for relief organizations that have sort of a way of doing things, and they want to address kind of those visible, simple problems like food or housing or water that you think are just simple, but they're actually under the surface are very complex and require more, I think, of a different process than what's been offered before. And so I would love to hear from you, how has that transition been to pivot or to move from being relief focused to development focused? Because you have a bit of both in what you do. And so I'd love to hear more about how that transition has been and what you've learned and what you're learning and how you foresee that continuing to unfold.
Well, yeah, I think as LUV just mentioned, the 3 key pillars, when we talk of, when someone talks of a vulnerable person, one of the first things which comes into one's mind is, protection. Mm-hmm. But then protection is, safety is nothing without other models of ensuring that there is a long-term solution to the vulnerability. And therefore, that's how we have come up with, with the education as one of the key pillars. And education will enlighten one, and education will create a chance for one to fit in the society. And more so because of the disadvantages with the vulnerable people, then the economic empowerment aspect comes in, so that when that vulnerable leaves, he or she is a whole person. Mm-hmm. There isn't any other probably ripples of the vulnerability penetrating in again. And that's why we can't emphasize on economic empowerment more. It's critical. But then coming also to your question on the need to change from relief to some sort of empowerment model, history, and for the many years we've worked in the war zones, has taught us that relief is not a solution to vulnerabilities. Relief is just supposed to be for a short period of time, a short while. Relief is good for disaster. Relief is good when you just want to achieve results, probably short-term results. But then history And the long term we've been in the war zones has proved otherwise, that the best way we can be able probably to make sure that we have people going out who are, what I would say, insulated against the vulnerabilities, is to empower them with some skills where they can be able to go to use, they can be able to use those skills on in the markets. They can use them even to change the narratives in their countries, because we are working in the war zones. Remember, probably I can say no one is living now in South Sudan, probably, and to some extent in Sudan, who was not born in war. So there is a lot of aspect of trauma. These people have depended on LUV for so long that it's like an entitlement. But what Lift Up the Vulnerable is doing is changing that narrative by introducing other models of enlightening the vulnerable children and women, and making sure that there is not only a change in them, but also a change in the communities. Because if you just change the children and the women, then without also any impact in the surrounding community, then the impact might not be so much felt. And therefore, Lift Up the Vulnerable has come up with several measures to ensure that they are taking care of the vulnerabilities, and there are many other also benefits. We are equipping our children with technical skills. We are teaching them on business models. We are empowering the community through women who have never been to school. And it's also going to give statistics and understand that over 75% of the South Sudanese and people in Nova Mountains are illiterates. They do not know how to read and write. And so empowering such women to be productive in a war zone is just an amazing thing. And we, as they produce also, one of the cultures we want to teach them is to be producers rather than be consumers. And by being producers, then it means they will have some surplus also, which they can take into the market and empower them economically. Once they are empowered economically, then there is reduction on vulnerabilities. Remember, a widow somewhere who has nothing to eat or drink is very likely to be a prey, probably, to a man somewhere. But if this poor woman is economically empowered, then those chances become probably even zero. And so that's our focus. Our focus is on empowerment, not only to the orphans, not only to the vulnerable children we're taking care of, but even the community at large.
Mm. And what do you think more nonprofits or NGOs can do to become more focused on development rather than relief?
Well, this is, first of all, I want to say you can do it. That's the first thing I would say to every nonprofit and international, from massive to small, is it is possible. We've proven it's possible, and we're continuing to prove it's possible. And there are other organizations out there that are also have made this shift. And so, but the caveat is it's hard work. It's much harder than relief, right? From me, from an operations perspective, it's not so hard to initiate a wire transfer for a certain lump sum of money and work with Eugenio to coordinate a large shipment of food and distribute it. But it's a lot more effort to hold face-to-face trainings with women who are illiterate and teach them particular techniques, and then follow up regularly and support them as they try and maybe sometimes fail, and continue and try again and encourage them. And that's just one example. right? And it's hard to take the time to dedicate to to starting incubator projects and pilot projects and seeing how it works and learning from mistakes. So it's a long-term strategy. And I would say from an ego perspective, sometimes it's hard to let go of power and let go of control. And that is a critical element, right? That you have to be willing to trust your interlocutors and to trust your partners and to believe in them and to support them and to listen to them. There's a tremendous kind of pull towards, I think, sometimes the top, and a gravitational pull towards the top of an organization, an expectation that they're going to have all the answers. And that in a sense is just another part of a relief mentality rather than and a dependency mentality rather than an empowerment mentality. And so, also speaking the words of empowerment to your partners and emphasizing and repeating that this is our model. This is our focus. Our focus is on empowerment at every level of an organization, and that as the leaders are empowered, they should be focusing on empowering their staff, and their staff should be focusing on empowering, their students or those within their own families. And so it creates a kind of it's a cultural shift, an organizational cultural shift, and that takes a lot of work. Let's be honest, but it's incredibly rewarding. And I would highly encourage every organization to take a really deep and hard look at their kind of organizational culture first, and then take the radical steps that are necessary to make those changes.
Mm-hmm. I appreciated, what I heard in there about how it's harder, but the impact is greater. Because I think that's where it gets tricky when we don't see the instant results. We feel like sometimes our efforts aren't meaningful, but it's that slow process, the messy process, like you alluded to, of, helping someone who's illiterate over and over and over again to finally become literate, or, whatever that takes to eventually become autonomous. And I know coming from the US, where we, when it comes to fundraising, there's this tension where we feel this pressure to show our impact rate right away, because we want our donors to feel like they're contributing to something great. And so there can be this tension sometimes between how do you get people to fund this concept that up front is not going to look like it has the biggest turnaround, but long term it's the greater investment. Whereas the relief, you might feel like you're seeing an instant response because you can say, I've fed X amount of children, or I've clothed X amount of people. And you can't always account for the externalities of a development approach, where, it may be 10 years down the line where you get to see the real impact. So I want to support what you just said, and also say, keep fighting this fight, because it's the good fight. It's the fight we all need to be fighting. But very often, I think it feels like going against the grain of what many in this sector have been conditioned to believe is important when we talk about, reporting impact or success rates or whatever that is. And that's too, I think it's important that we have these conversations to really bring to light that we need to think about the opportunity cost, not just of, what are we going to fix today, but what will we impact for tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day, even though we can't see it right away right now. It's kind of like a seed. It has to go in the ground for a little while, and you're not going to see it sprout for maybe several months. But then when it does, it has the potential to not only flourish, but then to regenerate itself. So anyway, that was a long-winded way of saying I agree with you, and I appreciate the approach that you're taking, especially coming from having been a relief model to then transition to one of development. I think that takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength to change the way that you're doing things. And I would imagine it's been not an easy journey at all points. So I commend you for that.
And it was and it was to add one note, it was the nature of our organization and the long-term approach that led us to this shift, because we started with a lot of younger children who were in need of immediate relief and protection and aid. And then by persevering with them over a 10-year period and reaching a point in 2016 where we saw our first high school graduates, it was at that moment, and maybe even a few years earlier, when it began to be clear that, you know, the wider situation in country wasn't changing nearly rapidly enough to provide the kind of job opportunity and support when they graduated, but that there needed to be also a moment of flying the coop, of like leaving the nest, right? And that, so the nature of the style of the work we were doing also created the impetus for the strategic planning to start moving in a different direction, right? And to build out the holistic model beyond graduation and beyond when they leave the immediate care. And so there's that, just kind of emphasizes it is a long-term approach, but in my opinion, the only successful development approach is a long-term strategic, patient approach that incorporates the constant input and leadership of the indigenous population and leadership on the ground, right? And that's just to circle back to that. We couldn't do anything we're doing if it wasn't for the committed leadership of our partners at the locations that we serve.
Absolutely.
And I think also to add on to what LUV is saying, you know, in development, there is a lot of transfer of skills and knowledge for the future sustainability. Of course, without forgetting that we are living in a very uncertain world. Just recently, we saw the effect of COVID-19, where the world, you know, almost came to a standstill. And so in such instances, any organization which is depending on 100% of relief is not able to, you know, to survive through such turbulent times. And when you're talking of skills also, for instance, the agricultural project which you're talking about, there is a lot of transfer of technology from the developed world to Sudan and South Sudan. And further to that, also in most of the places where we are working, they have not been able to tap into the potential in these areas, as Rob mentioned earlier. One of the gifts, the blessings in those countries is rain. There is 6 months rain. There is 6 months of rainfall in a year. But unfortunately, because of the political instability, everyone has been in the land. No one has any time probably to get engaged into any meaningful agriculture. And so when we are on the ground and exchanging this knowledge with them, one of the first impacts we see is the change of the mindset from the importation now to the aspect of production. And that insulates the communities and the population there against the aftershocks of some of the calamities which can occur in the future. So just thought it's important also to mention that.
Oh, absolutely. Just to, you know, for anyone who's listening who would like to be involved in your work or support your work, what would be a good way for them to do that?
Well, there's several ways. We, of course, are Lift Up the Vulnerable is still the funding agency for the work on the ground. And so obviously, you know, finances are always important, and support and donors are valued and welcomed, and we would encourage anybody to go to our liftupthevulnerable.org and donate. But in addition to that, we are an organization that has a lean stateside team intentionally, and so we offer opportunities for volunteer opportunities of various types. That would be something that, as someone joined our mission, in support, there's other secondary steps that can be taken to support us in spreading the word in a number of different ways, which I don't want to go into all the details of it, but there's a lot of work to be done, and we have a really, really big vision for South Sudan. We believe that this model, as we hone it and we continue to build on successes we've had in the past, it will be a replicable model that we hope that we'll be able to see the impacts expand more and more. But obviously, nothing can be done without money.
Right.
Not to be too crass, but
no.
We are a nonprofit, 501(c), and we are the currently the 100% funder for these 3 locations where we work. The goal, of course, is that that's going to shift through local income generation, but it's going to take some time, right, to see that happen.
Yep, absolutely. Well, we'll make sure that your link is listed below, so it's very accessible for anyone who wants to donate or participate or volunteer. So that'll be very easy for them to locate. I'd like to ask a little bit about impact, and how do you measure impact? How do on your team, how do you discern what to measure and how that's done?
Well, our impact is mentioned on the numbers in different areas, and just maybe as we speak right now, we have about 11 students who are in public and private universities. As a matter of fact, we have another 3 who graduated with various degrees, some in medical, nursing. We also have some who are already under scholarship from the government because they excelled very well from our institutions, and they're in different countries having scholarships there, but still under our care. We have, and this is really important, 70 women who knew nothing about agriculture, who have never done any farming. We have a group of 70 women now, and every woman is doing an acre of farming in their homesteads. And those farms, those small farms which they're doing in their homesteads, are also acting as the catalyst to change the communities, because they are able to see the modern styles of farming which they are using, and the community is adopting. They're able to see them produce vegetables and sell into the market and make money. And so through that, the others who are not among the 70 also develop interest in doing the same, because they can see they can see with their own eyes what is happening. Over and above that, cumulatively also, we have about 120 acres of farmland in the different ministries. It might seem a very small area by the world standard or any other standard in any other part of the world, but this should be one of the biggest farms in the country, something which has never been seen. As a matter of fact, at Hope for South Sudan, we are doing over 75 acres of farming, and this is phenomenal in a war zone. And so those are some of we use the numbers. We have about over 1,500 children right now under our care, and so the impact is just phenomenal if you look at the overall. And let me also just take you a little bit back to history. When you're talking of these students who are probably in university, who are we talking about? During the attacks from the Janjaweed militias, when their parents were killed, they were left with no parents. And majority of them probably over 90% of them saw their parents being killed. They saw their hearts being burnt. They saw their mothers being raped. They saw their sisters' hands being cut off. And they were lucky that they ran into the bushes. And when they went into the bushes, because the villages were burnt, these children were sleeping in top of trees. Of course, when they fall asleep at times, some of them fall down from the top of the tree. Unfortunately, there were so many hyenas around New Life Ministry in particular at that time. And every time a kid could fall from a tree, he or she was chewed by the animals. And so among the ones who survived are the children we picked when they were very young. And right now, we are talking of people or children who are doing different degrees in different universities. So some of them, as I said, some of them are doctors, are doing medicine, others are doing nursing, you know, and so it's just good to look at, to visualize on the process that if this kid who could not have been rescued at that time, he or she would have been fallen prey to the hyena attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess, well, I'll just say one other thing about this, which is that to me, this is the real story, is that we're doing all the things that we've just been talking about in the context of trauma-informed care. We're not only are we providing formal education K through 12, but we're also providing spiritual and psychological support for each and every child that we care for, and that it adds another layer of challenges to the work that we do on top of the security challenges and the logistical challenges. And so that's why I said to every other organization out there that's tempted by just providing relief, you really can't afford to do that, because you're going to be there forever, because the needs are huge and unending. So instead of focusing in that direction, you have to look at it from a holistic approach and really make a strong commitment to providing a holistic healing and support and empowerment, because it will have reverberations across the society in a positive way. And that's what we're starting to see. And that's what Eugenio was kind of giving examples of. And it's extremely exciting. It's a story of hope. It's not really a story of gloom and doom. That's the other thing I want to say, is that we have on our website a section where we profile students and stories of success. And we caption it stories of hope. And that's intentional, because that is our view. We're hopeful people. We're optimistic. We're seeing it work. It's hard and it's difficult and it can be a struggle, and you need patience and you need to have kindness and grace to each other, but it can be done. And it's really, really exciting. And I get excited just hearing Eugenio explain some of and remind us that this history is important. Mm-hmm. But you know, history is not the end of the story.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent segue actually into my next question. I'd love to hear if you have any examples of personal stories that have touched you in your work at Lift Up the Vulnerable.
Yeah, sure. I think there are many stories. We have so many stories, success stories which we can talk about. And of course, I mentioned about the women. I don't want to dwell on that. We currently, as we speak, some years back, we picked one of the orphans from the Nuba Mountains. One of the orphans actually was also sleeping in the cleft of the mountains, shading herself from the bones. She lost her mother and her father when she was very, very young. As a matter of fact, she never had the chance to see her father. And so she was brought up by a very, very abusive aunt. And when we were in Nuba Mountains, we heard about the case, and this girl was so much interested in education. And so what we did, because we had not developed infrastructure in Nuba Mountains at that time, we were just at the initial stages of starting the very lower classes. And this girl struggled on her own so many times, to go work somewhere, get some little pay, go home, get a dollar beating from the hand because she never spent the day at home, pay her school fees, and we are lifting this girl to South Sudan, where we had already developed infrastructure at home for South Sudan. And so we enrolled this girl in this orphan in the primary school. She went all the way to high school. After high school, because still we've not developed infrastructure in terms of the technical training colleges, we lifted her and enrolled her in a nursing school in Uganda. 2 years ago, she completed a nursing course. She went back to go for South Sudan, where she has been volunteering to help in our center there. And as we speak, last month, we took her back to the Nuba Mountains to take up a job. As a nurse. She's going to be working as a nurse in one of the hospitals there, and also serving our community. This is a community she left over 12 years ago. And when I was trying to follow up, she couldn't even remember anyone. But that notwithstanding, that's a very, very good message, even to the other vulnerable children in Nuba Mountains, that they have a role model. They have someone who they can know did everything possible amidst all the horns and got into some level. And now she's back serving her community. It's one of the things which I feel, to me, that is great.
Mm-hmm. What is her name? Are you able to say?
Her name is Anan. Anan. The name of the girl is Anan Hassan.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Where do you see Lift Up the Vulnerable in the next 5 to 10 years? What is your vision for the future?
Well, we have a lot of things that we'd like to do, but our immediate plan is to build on the success that we've already had in agriculture and education first and foremost, and strengthen those two areas at all 3 locations. And part of that means that, as Eugenio mentioned, Hope for South Sudan has the largest acreage that's currently being tilled and harvested of 75, and the plan is to scale that up over the next 3 to 4 years to nearly 400 acres. Which will be a huge, have a huge impact because it will provide food security for that location. And then we will simultaneously begin to transfer, and we already have begun to do this, to transfer knowledge and skills and techniques that are working there and indigenize them to the other 2 locations, which have their own independent environmental issues and challenges with water that are different. So each location is unique, but it is a network, and it's a very agile network where the leaders work together, they communicate regularly, we hold leadership summits, they share ideas, and we can transfer to expand agriculture at the other 2 locations. And it's even possible in the next 10 years, although this will need a lot more planning, that we could see a kind of like a food security network, right? Where one area perhaps can grow one item that another area not as easily can grow, and we can transfer between, right? Internally export. Of course, the secondary goal of that is local income generation and skills building for the community, to expand it out. We don't want to just reach 70, illiterate community women. We want to reach hundreds, thousands, and see, because each woman is part of a family, Each woman, and most of the women that we're training currently have husbands. Some of them, have even given testimony that they're just so supportive of this because some of them serve in the army and they're away and they're concerned about taking care of their families. And now that it relieves some of that burden. So there's a tremendous acceptance and excitement within the communities about what we're doing. We just want to scale that up. And also in terms of education, strengthen that through adding, as I mentioned earlier, the kind of additional skills and courses that we identify as being critical add-on skills besides the ABCs to be able to equip the children as they enter young adulthood to know what they're good at, know what they enjoy, and have an immediate ability to start making money when they graduate if they don't go to university. Because this is a critical step. And so that's a big part of our planning, is to really enhance and continue to strengthen the educational component of our mission. And then I guess the third thing would be, if, everything continues as it has been with the growth and the development and the strengthening of this model that we have, then the sky's the limit. Maybe we replicate in another location if there's an indigenous partner that is ready and willing and wants to partner with us in that way. Or maybe it turns out that it's just a model that can be utilized by other organizations. It's, in the 5 to 10 years, we'd like to see food security at minimum, and ideally much more.
Excellent. And how do you see your role evolving in this future?
Well, Lift Up the Vulnerable, I think a lot of organizations that, especially that do fundraising and development work, would love to say we want to work ourselves out of a job. And that kind of becomes almost like a buzz phrase that's used. In the case of South Sudan and Sudan, these are two of the most difficult countries to work in the world. Not, set aside the African continent specifically and say that in human indices listings, these two countries tend to fall at the bottom or at the top, depending on whatever the negative listing is, whether it's, infant mortality, life expectancy, female mortality rates, and so it's unlikely that we'll work ourselves out of a job, but if we can continue to encourage empowerment and independence, economic, in terms of leadership, in terms of innovation, I think that's going to be where we're going to continue to strengthen what we've been doing and try to learn from mistakes and continue to improve in that regard.
Mm-hmm. And to kind of circle back to that long-term discussion that we had, maybe in your lifetime or in your career, you won't be able to work yourself out of a job, but perhaps, your successors will. Perhaps in a few generations, the organization and the country will be in a position where that will make sense and will be appropriate. So if you continue this model where you are continually investing in the people and equipping them, I think that's a real possibility. Might not be, immediate, but that doesn't mean that it's not possible.
Yeah, and we hope that as generations of children go through this holistic program and are able to find, I guess you could say, not just add on the skills, but all the life skills to really succeed, that they will be the empowered change makers for South Sudan. We believe they're already happening. I mean, this story of Hanan is a tremendous success story. It's an amazing story, and we have many others like it. And we expect that there's going to be, more and more, and that the ripple effect is going to be massive. And that is our goal, is to see nations transformed. That's the final step. And so we are aiming very high, but with a methodical and step-by-step and patient approach, those dreams can be made realities.
Absolutely.
And we believe in that.
Yep, I do too. I'm with you in that. Well, thank you both for joining us today. I just really appreciate hearing your work and the approach that you've taken, and the very healthy progress that you're making towards your goals. Just to reiterate one more time, if anyone listening would like to contribute to your work, what would be the best way for them to locate you?
The best way is through our website. It's liftupthevulnerable.org, and there's clearly marked donation buttons there. And also, please sign up for our email list. We send out regular updates. If someone wanted to become a recurring monthly donor, we also have a special community called the Love Collective, and we provide kind of insider reports to profile some of the challenges and successes. And there's other levels of contribution and support that you could also do, and the level of spreading the word about the mission. And so there's lots of opportunity there, but the first step is definitely to go to our website. We have a robust presence on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter as well, and a LinkedIn page. So we're able to be found. Liftupthevulnerable.org.
Perfect. And we'll make sure that all of that is in the description below, so anyone watching can find you very easily. So thank you both for being here today and sharing about your work. I just really appreciate it. And I want to commend you, and I want to encourage you to say, keep it up. You're doing it right. And thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely. Here at Emanate International, it is our mission to promote nonprofits and social enterprises that equip individuals and communities to become independent, autonomous, thriving members of society. Indeed, Lift Up the Vulnerable is certainly doing great work to prevent further trafficking and equip women and children to flourish sustainably through education and economic empowerment. If you enjoyed our discussion today, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to be in the know for future inspirational conversations with other leaders who are making great gains and improving our world. Thank you.